to dig into those figures a bit more and find out what is going on and quite why the police have essentially stopped doing their job is Kevin Hurley, who's former police and crime commissioner and also happens to be the former head of volume crime at the Met Police, which is exactly just this thing. Kevin, I could not believe when I read that today and looking at this article, front page of the Telegraph, and some of those statistics, it's utterly harrowing. It's like we've become a lawless society where you can do what you want with impunity.
Well, I'm not surprised in the slightest. It's very, very disappointing. It's totally unsatisfactory. But what you're looking at is the result of years and years of underinvestment in what's required now for police to operate. We had 13 years of austerity, which has done a number of things. First off, a large cutback in the number of police officers actually operationally deployed, albeit we've now got 20,000 newbies who've come in who clearly, of course, don't know what to do. But on top of that, the demands on police are so vast and so all-encompassing that instead of police being able to respond to burglary calls or your car being broken into and do some meaningful investigation, they're off dealing with all kinds of different stuff, mentally disordered people in the street, missing persons, walking out of care homes and so on because of the cutbacks. The other problem that you've got, and this is what is really awful, is that the CID in many police forces, especially the Met, are unable to recruit people to become detectives because the job is seen as so pressurised, so unpleasant, people don't want to do it. Combine that with the fact that there is wholesale recruitment of unhappy detectives to the private sector now, so that the level of expertise amongst even the few detectives that they've got is just draining out the window. As far as I'm concerned, it's quite an appalling situation. And all we've got with Suella Braverman here is a bit of a soundbite saying, oh, it's all the police's fault. No, it's not. When you close every detective training school in the country, when you close all the regional training centres for police in the country, and then you try and say, oh, we've solved it, we've brought in 20,000 newbies who haven't really got a clue what to do, and you're losing all the detectives because they don't want to stay because the package is so poor and so stressful, we shouldn't be surprised that we've got what we've got. All completely predictable. And I played a role in trying to get the gap in detectives filled more than 10, 12, 13 years ago when this was all starting to develop. I mean, tragically, it's meaningless, and senior police chiefs also do not tell the truth and stand up and say what the reality of it all is.
I mean, one thing that surprises me is we live in an age now where so many people will have things like Ring doorbell systems so they can see what's going on outside their front doors, cyclists going around with those helmet cams on. And this should surely make it far easier to report crimes going on because you have the video evidence that can be handed to someone. It should be cut and dry. Is there a problem here that perhaps there's way too much bureaucracy and paperwork? And also, why on earth, if we're hearing that, police aren't investigating, in some instances, zero crimes when it comes to theft? I mean, even muggings, only 6% of people charged. That actually chills me to the bone. And yet it seems to me that they turn up on people's doorsteps for things like hate crime or nasty tweet.
Well, I mean, that you get small sound bites of hate crime cases that hit the media, which is tiny in proportion to the actual number of other crimes going on across the country. The real issue is police are so overwhelmed with all kinds of demands for service that they're actually really come and pick up on these, if you like, Ring doorbells, some of these videos from scientists. We're there to try and get a grip of it personally, because the reason why people actually join the police to a large extent is they like to nick bad people. That's what it's all about. But there are so many, if you like, forces militating against it. You mentioned some of them before, which is bureaucracy, the elements of paperwork. So let me give you a small example. There was a time when if you went and arrested a shoplifter, you could bring them in very quickly, short report, take the fingerprints, photograph them, bail them off to court, and you'd be out the door maybe within an hour and a half, 2 hours. These days, the whole process of the interview, of then submitting or waiting for the Crown Prosecution Service to give a decision, well, what's going to happen with this case? You're hanging on the phone, mate, for an hour, 2 hours to find a Crown prosecution lawyer, because, of course, they've all been cut back. And the other problem that you've got, and it's all very well, all this, frankly, BS sound bites, is the prisons are completely full to bursting.
Yeah.
And
You've got to wait a year and a half for your day in court as well, don't you? I mean, the backlog in the courts is ridiculous.
I mean, people want to criticise the police, and I'm more than critical because they never cease to disappoint. However, the reason the prisons are full is not because of the RSPCA problem there, it's because police caught them, got them convicted. So it's a bit of a problem now when there's no room for prisons and we see people going to court with 30, 40, 50 convictions and not getting a custodial sentence. There was a case the other day, a guy was convicted for the 4th time in possession of a knife and did not go to prison with 40-odd previous convictions.
Yeah, I read that one. So, it's shocking, absolutely shocking.
Suella Braverman, quite frankly, is bluffing here for political reasons and needs to fix the entire criminal justice system, build more prisons, rebuild the damage they did to the probation service, re-employ people for drug rehabilitation work, get more diversionary work going, and rebuild the training establishments for police officers to teach them to investigate, because most of them do not know how to investigate.
Blimey, and the work should be so much more easy for them at the moment with all of this modern technology. Kevin, don't go anywhere. We're going to cross over to some of our callers now who may want to put a question to you. First of all, Ralph in Essex. Tell us, what do you think about this? I mean, I was pretty shocked when I looked in black and white at the statistics of how few criminals end up being charged. I mean, I think it's dreadful if I think of me or a friend, my mother or someone being mugged and the likelihood of that person having anything happen to them.
But this is about being arrested, not about being charged. And as far as I can see, I can't see why a shortage of police is an excuse for arresting nobody. It might be an arrest for not arresting everybody, but it's not an excuse for arresting nobody.
So what do you think's going on here then, Ralph? Do you think there's sort of like a sense among the police that they all want to maybe, you know, do the big cases, the big crimes, but they're sort of fiddling around at the edges with thefts and burglaries?
Yeah,
and a bit...
there's no standards. And the people that actually try to live by the books and live decently see what's going on around them. A lot of them that are don't turn to crime, but they give up. They no longer have the sense of decency they used to have. That's the problem.
A sort of backsliding in society and values and neighbourhoods and communities looking after each other.
But there are lots of people that go to prison, and a spell in prison does the trick. But I'm not going there again. But they're they're in and out all the time. And that's not the answer. That, in my opinion, it's not anyway.
Ralph, I think you make an interesting point there, and something that I've spoken about on a number of my programmes. This is uptick in people looting and putting it on TikTok. I mean, you know, it's brazen, isn't it? Let's go and raid Foot Locker or Primark and then post it online. What has the world come to? Anthony in Surrey, what are your thoughts on this matter? Where do you think the blame lies? Is it the Home Office? Is this Suella Braverman once again diverting blame from her? The buck doesn't stop here. Surely it stops with the police. They're just not doing their jobs. And the police sitting back and saying, well, how can we do our jobs when there's not enough of us? We don't have the right sort of resources. There's a backlog in the courts. Our prisons are full and we've got so much paperwork we can barely put bobbies on the beat. Who do you think's at fault?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Alex.
Good
nice
afternoon.
to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you too.
Well, you've said it all, because I didn't realise she still existed, Braverman, because she's disappeared all over the summer, and she can't even get a plane off the ground or even float a boat. So this is a rather big wish list for Braverman to do, you know, solve the crime problem after 13 years of cuts.
So you'd put it down to cuts, would you? Because it's interesting. It seems to me time after time, whoever is in the Home Office, it's a bit of a poison chalice, isn't it? It's almost the worst job you can get as a minister, because it seems to me, you know, that particular part of Whitehall is a law unto themselves anyway. Whenever the Home Secretary tries to put in place a policy, you've got hand-wringers and do-gooders amongst the civil service saying, oh, this is really nasty and mean. Then, of course, it goes back to austerity. I mean, but is it the fact that poor Suella Braverman has all the right intentions, but she can't manoeuvre either?
Well, she's very good at intentions. She's very good at colourful outfits, but that's all I can say about her, looking at your sequence earlier. You know, is this going to be the person to turn around the situation? I don't think so. I think Rishi Sunak lacks courage, because I think she needs moving on, because we hear that he was going to have a reshuffle, but now things have backed out of it. We've got a weak Home Secretary and a weak Prime Minister.
But is a reshuffle the way forward? Because I always think reshuffles is sort of messing around, moving people around jobs again, instead of, you know, someone might be halfway through a plan, don't get to enact it because it's chopping and changing all the time. Surely the longer someone is in position, we know where the buck stops and we can hold them accountable. Where someone new comes in, it's like, oh, sorry, still got to learn the job, only got a year to go before the government probably changes.
Well, yes, exactly. We can't blame it exactly on the Conservatives, because if anybody remembers those long ago days of New Labour, how many Home Secretaries did they have? I mean, Jackie Smith, at least she resigned. At least in those days they did resign when they were obviously incompetent. There were so many that resigned, I've lost count of them.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I always think reshuffles are just a device that pleases the headline writers and the live television broadcasters more than anyone. And out there, people in the country don't give two hoots. At one point, we've had 3 prime ministers in a year and 5 chancellors and Lord knows how many everything else half the time. And I'm a journalist. I don't know who's doing what job.
Yeah, can I just say to your guest, may I just ask you, guest, I'm trying to be polite, but I imagine you remember the days when we had the magpies. We had some terrifying campaigns, Let's Crack Down Crime, I think it was called. And in those days, there was a real national effort to crack down on crime. We had Crime Watch, you know, and this thing, well, Tony Blair developed this thing, the community, and we had the community bobbies. And now we seem to be getting somewhere at least. But this thing has been completely destroyed.
Well, let's put that to Kevin Hurley, of course, the former Police and Crime Commissioner, and also used to be head of high-volume crimes for the Met Police. I mean, do you remember these days in the 90s where there were the magpies and there was sort of this sense of fear about policing being present and doing their jobs?
Well, I mean, you're talking to someone who had his own TV programme that called Brick Cop Zero Tolerance, which started off every week with me turning to the camera and saying, they don't rule the streets, we do. So that's my philosophy on policing. Police are there to protect the public and make the bad people understand that they do not control the streets. But it actually goes back to my point earlier, which is there's a whole load of stuff that's needed to make us safe. So at one end, we need proper social services interventions to deal with problem families and those that need supporting, to arrange for youth diversion and so on. We then, of course, need an effective police force with proper training, adequate leaders. We need a good court system. We need a good prison system. We need a good probation system, drug rehabilitation. All of those have been cut very badly over the last 13 years. And I don't want to make a political point, but I won't. But the fact is, you only get what you pay for. And if you don't pay for all these things and you're closing magistrates' courts everywhere to save money, witnesses won't come forward because the journeys are too far, and so on. We're in a really bad situation, which requires a paradigm shift across not only Home Office, but across the Justice Secretary as well as those elements responsible for local government. Say, if we want the mortar between the bricks of society to hold society together, we need to invest in the whole criminal justice, social services piece, as well as police. I work internationally in places like Iraq and Afghanistan on advising and policing. And I see at first hand what happens to countries when you fail to sustain law and order, if you like.
Yeah,
and we are slowly going down that route.
Well, it's not long before we start having vigilantism.
I mean, I've got to tell you, anyone who comes into my house better watch out.
Well, there you go. You heard it from Kevin first. I wouldn't try and burgle him because he's going to have you. Kevin Hurley, their former Police and Crime Commissioner.